Actually, upon further reflection, I want to spend a little bit more time uh, before we get into the um, parable of the Good Samaritan. Well, some say it's a parable. I think it probably is, um, but some say it's not. So that there was a literal, historical event. I don't know that it needs to be that for it to be accurate. Um, in any event, the lawyer tries to tempt Jesus, asks him a question. Jesus responds with a question, right? What do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, what's it say in the law? How do you read it? The lawyer responds, love the Lord your God with everything in you and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says in verse 28, hey, you got it. That's right. Do that and you'll live. Some people cannot accept a win, right? Sometimes it's for whatever reason that's going on in their own minds that we don't have access to. They've got the answer right, but they won't accept success. They have to keep going. This typically shows us something about them, right? Not about us, about them. And we might see that with our children, we might see it with our parents, we might see it with our friends, we might see it with coworkers. Jesus sees it here with this lawyer, right? Because in verse 29, he wants to justify himself. That is, he wants to demonstrate his own kind of value, his own worth in this, his own correctness, right? And so he asks, who is my neighbor? And it wasn't really until teaching this class. I mean, I've looked at this passage so many times, and it just never dawned on me until teaching this class. And that's kind of the fun thing about all literature, but especially I think about the biblical literature, is there's always some kind of new insight that you can get if we just slow down and look at it and chew on it and look at it some more and look at it some more. And 5 years from now, I might come back to this text and say, oh man, I never saw that. Well, I hadn't really seen this before until preparing for this class. He wants to justify himself when he's already given the correct answer and he's already been affirmed by Jesus. He wants to tempt Jesus. Jesus asked him the rebuttal kind of question, answers the question with the question. The lawyer gives an answer that Jesus totally affirms and affirms him. Hey, do that and you live. And this is in the hearing of these other people around, and Jesus has just affirmed this guy's approach and affirmed the law in the hearing of these other folks at the in this context. It's inexplicable to me why this lawyer comes back and says, well, I need to justify myself. What is it in him? So I'm placing myself in that text again, and I'd encourage you to place yourself in the text. What is it in him? What is his paranoia? What is his concern that he feels like he needs to justify himself before Jesus? And he asks this question. He doesn't ask the question about loving God, right? Why would he? That's kind of straightforward. Maybe he went farther than he meant to when he answered the question. I don't know. The narrator doesn't tell us. Luke doesn't tell us what's going on in his mind here other than he wants to justify himself. But he comes back to Jesus and says, who's my neighbor? And it starts with this question in chapter 10, verse 25, about inheriting eternal life. And now we've got this transition in verse 29, who is my neighbor? All related to that question about eternal life. And it seems that the lawyer didn't have to open himself up for this, except that there's something going on in him. And this is what happens sometimes in all of our context. There's something going on in the psyche of the individual that gives us clues about navigating that relationship, or in the case of patient care, may tell us something about how we see that person, and how you as nurses treat that person, how you diagnose, how you think through the strategy, because you find out these little things. I asked my wife one time, I go to the doctor and for an appointment, and so somebody comes in to the room when you finally get back to the exam room. Somebody comes in and takes your blood pressure and asks you why you're there today, and asks you a couple of questions. And then typically an RN will come in and ask you some of the same questions and look at your blood pressure and your heart rate and something like that, but ask you very similar questions. And then the doctor comes in and asks you the same doggone questions. So are they not communicating? What is the breakdown here? And what she told me is they're trying to make sure that the answer is the answer, and they're looking for commonality. There's actually a strategy about it. At least that's what she told me. And maybe she's just messing with me. I was just dumb enough to believe it. But it made sense to me that if someone is asked the same question over and over again, maybe there's more that comes out. Maybe there's more information given that can be helpful in treatment. And I look at this exchange here and this pivot in verse 29. I think maybe we're finding out something about this lawyer, because he could have dropped it. He was affirmed by Jesus. He got the answer that he needed. But then he presses it further. Who is my neighbor? Really important question, because it sets up this conversation about an expansive view of neighborliness. All right, so we'll come back. I promise this next time we will deal specifically with the Good Samaritan.